Robots. What exactly do you think of when you see or hear the word robot? What does a robot mean and what can it actually do? We think of automatons that look like human beings that can perform similar tasks that human beings can. But there's many different meanings behind robots. We even have an innate fear of a robot revolution, a vast army of robots walking down our streets and taking over our entire civilization. But what's the real account behind robots? What are they exactly? Are they the robots of life or the robots of death? We're going to explore both. Come join me as we examine the account of the Robots of Tartaria. Robots of life. So, robots are oftentimes associated with science fiction concepts, at least that's what we tend to think of. We oftentimes overlook the other concepts of robots or the actual automated robots that we have working in our many factories to this very day, or even the robots that just do simple displays. But what's the origin of the robot? Well, in our official history, we have the automaton, or the individual that replicated human anatomy. And of course, it was yet another design from the great Leonardo da Vinci. Because, of course, a polymath who comes up with anything and everything. Not only is he a great artist, but he can design an actual revolutionary concept of some sort of being or automated being that runs on his observations of human anatomy. He can replicate this and put it into a being and then actually have it be something that can move in the same way that a human being can. Of course, what's the practical application behind it, as there was no power source or any sort of independent way of employing these robots, and yet it was stated to be Leonardo da Vinci who came up with these initial drawings, these original concepts. And so this is the issue that we have when we look at official history. We have elements such as this, where there's this great idea of this revolutionary concept, but how does one even practically apply it? And the official explanation will be, much like when we have all those architects that design those incredible buildings that nobody can ever build, imaginations run wild. We have creativity and people show that. And I certainly like to embrace and support that, but when you think of what was actually going on when Leonardo da Vinci was alive and you think of the means and implements available, you find that they tend not to support what was actually conceptualized in his mind. For example, he had the armored knight with the servos and mechanisms that could actually move it, but what was the method for really powering it? I remember what Dean Kamen said about engineers actually being people who could find modern practical solutions. And then, of course, we have the Czech playwright, Karel Čapek, who came up with Rossum's Universal Robots, a play that talked about robots that were actually much more human-like, or perhaps compared with the robots of the modern TV series Westworld. And I'm going to have limited references to Westworld because I didn't exactly appreciate what happened with the plot in that series after the first season, but that's just me. Isaac Asimov, the science fiction author, was the individual who really stated and actually brought out the rules and the concepts for the modern robot after the term was introduced by Karel Čapek, the Czech playwright. And Isaac Asimov's books really considered a civilization that was guided by robots. And that's what I want you to think about as we go through this exploration. What could robots really do? If you have automated machines that you can program for different outputs, and keep in mind we do actually have robots in our factories and in many other sorts of applications, some even showing surgical applications, and indeed they've even been used in the past for space exploration. But you consider the science fiction concept, and that's very much what robots were associated with, especially in the 1900s. And why was it important that robots actually have rules associated with them? Well, if you have a set of guidelines for robots, then suddenly they become another means of technology that augments your civilization. They increase your capability. In other words, when we're trying to explain all these incredible feats of the past, having robots actually provides that explanation. If you have automated beings that you can program for guided and repeated outputs, then suddenly there could be another explanation for how these incredible structures that are ubiquitous across the land could have been completed. Did Isaac Asimov and did Karel Capek have some sort of insight or some sort of memory or understanding? What's the real account behind Leonardo da Vinci's creation of the automaton, or at least his design of it? Was there actually a means of powering it? Or were they simply remembering or finding or having access to lost records? Is it possible that there was a previous civilization that really did have what we think of today or what we define today as robots? Very advanced robots that were very much human-like in many ways. And indeed, that's what we have to recall. There are many stories that certainly preceded Westworld, well, at least the TV series, to include the film Westworld. And here were the 3 laws from Isaac Asimov. A robot may not injure a human being, a robot must obey the orders given to it by human beings, and a robot must protect its own existence. And of course, you cannot contradict the first law with the second or the third, and you cannot contradict the first or second law with the third. We look at the robots of death. The robots of death concerning a robot revolution. And it's even considered a plot trope, if you will, in TV and science fiction. And Robots of Death was actually the name of a Doctor Who episode. Now, granted, in the 1970s, Doctor Who may not have had the greatest budget for costumes, and yet still they managed to employ a wonderful visualization of what a robot could look like and be like, even with a limited budget. It's amazing what a little bit of creativity and imagination can do for you. But the story concerned a mining vessel on another planet, never mind the plot, and imagine what it would be if this mining vessel was crewed by these robots. These robots that simply obeyed orders, and they abided by the 3 laws of robotics that science fiction author Isaac Asimov wrote out. However, there was an individual, a human being, who felt that these robots were being exploited. And this individual was stated to have even have been raised by robots. And suddenly you see these plot tropes, you see these repetitions coming up, that there is a segment of civilization or society that's being exploited by another. Is that really what robots represent? And the character is named Taran Capel, actually a reference to Karel Capek, the individual, the Czech playwright who coined the term robot. Even more interesting when you consider that robota actually is a reference to serf or slave. And indeed, that's how some actually pictured the robots being. What's very intriguing about this Doctor Who episode, though, is that there were 3 classes of robots. There were the robots that were considered dumbs. They couldn't talk at all. Then there were the gold robots. They could speak, but they didn't give commands. And then the silver robots, who were the highest ranking robots. So very intriguing that there was a hierarchy of robots. And of course, the plot concerned the efforts of Taran Capel to change the programming of these robots and turn them into the proverbial robots of death. And indeed, the plot revolves around the Doctor, the Time Lord, and his traveling companion Leela, trying to find out who's actually behind the reprogramming of these robots and save the remaining human crew of this sand miner that they've materialized on. Some of the elements that come up with this, though, are what are the real ideas of freedom and individuality? And some would say that all robots represent from these science fiction writers or these Czech playwrights is that they were merely an analogy for human beings who were actual serfs, and their entire role was simply to serve their civilization. And indeed, it is a very interesting premise. There's also the fact that you have people that are very set in their ways, and this is what classic Doctor Who did quite well, looking at societies and looking at their flaws. For example, the human commander of the mining vessel that they're on doesn't really seem to concern himself with the fact that multiple members of his crew are being murdered. Indeed, the Doctor even chastises him for saying, "You're crazy, you've got a robot revolution going on and you don't think there's anything wrong." The intriguing premise, though, I think, is the fact that things can be subverted, things can be changed. And perhaps this is really where the robots of death come from. The robots themselves are simple automatons. They're technology that's designed to assist a civilization. But much like any other form of technology, much like any intention, they can become subverted. They can be reprogrammed. And they can be repurposed to whatever sort of malintent one can believe. And therefore, that's where we have the proverbial concept of the robots of death. Now, the reason that I'm highlighting this Doctor Who episode is it may not be as well known as perhaps some other more pop culture references concerning robots, or even the robots of death. But does it really allude to something that may have happened in the distant past? Was there a time with a previous civilization where they had automatons that had actually risen up and revolted against them? And I know another recent science fiction property that considers this is Battlestar Galactica, the reimagined series. Although the creator of that series never decided to tell us what the real difference between a human and a robot was, or a Cylon as they were called. That's okay, it didn't sabotage that series' great ending, and I'm sure he had a good reason for not telling us. There's also the example of the servile machines in the Dune universe, an entire empire that was assisted and built by these servile machines, and yet when a group called the Titans, that were actually cyborgs or cymechs, decided to take over the empire, one of these cymechs had actually given too much power to these robots, these thinking machines, and soon the cymechs and the entire empire were being ruled by these thinking machines. And perhaps that's one of the interesting concepts of the Dune universe, is the fact that what we see is an entire response to the fact that thinking machines, or what we may think of as true artificial intelligence, and of course I say true artificial intelligence as in artificial intelligence that is actually sentient, artificial intelligence that can evolve and develop itself. And there are other allusions to it if you look in different cultures and different histories of humanity, that it may have once been possible to really have achieved such technological revolution, yet at the same time, you actually had this concept of these robots who developed themselves. In the Dune universe, the very people were actually enslaved by the robots. Now, there's two different perceptions of this. There's the original account as told by original Dune author Frank Herbert, and then of course there's the more modern account that changed the story a little bit. Now, I know there's a lot of feedback concerning the authors, such as the Dune Legend series that tells the story of the artificial intelligence that takes over the Empire, and the efforts to remove its control, and the story was told by Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson. Now, granted, the story they tell is a little bit different than the story that Frank Herbert alluded to, where things were told in more general terms. Now, I'm not going to dive into that controversy, but what I find really intriguing about it is that in the original Frank Herbert story, there was something that had a feel of a little bit more of a legend and a myth that could have been real. That really what he was telling the story of was the distant past, or perhaps even the not so distant past of humanity, where the robots had actually risen up and had either enslaved humanity itself or destroyed humanity itself, or at least elements of humanity. When we're looking for explanations in why our previous civilizations fell, is it possible that perhaps they were truly victims of their own technology? That their own technology was subverted, either inadvertently by themselves or perhaps by some sort of corrupting external influence? And that one of the ways that this previous civilization was targeted was that its ubiquitous servile machines were turned against it. And indeed, we think of the more famous example of Cyberdyne systems from the original two Terminator films. Interesting enough, and I only refer to those original two because they were closest to the concept of what it really meant to have an automaton that was terrifying and unstoppable. And then, as time went on, you saw that the automaton's capabilities increased. It went from being a heavily armored exoskeleton to liquid metal, capable of transforming into any sort of weapon, capable of being able to infiltrate any sort of human civilization or system. Many different interesting concepts. But now we look at the robots of Tartaria. Is it possible that the civilization that preceded ours, that on this channel we refer to as Tartaria, really had the capability of designing and creating automatons? It's not something we've addressed yet in our exploration, but I think it's something that we need to consider. Because we do have many different references to the fact that there were automatons in the distant past. And when I say distant past, what do I really mean? I'm actually even only talking about the early 1900s. And if you think about Leonardo da Vinci, you're talking about hundreds of years ago. Now, of course, we'll be informed that was not actually a robot that Leonardo da Vinci designed. It was merely an automaton, a being that just had servos and mechanisms the capability to mimic human movements, but oddly enough, no ability to be powered or independent on its own. You'll also find that if you look hard enough, there were numerous displays of robots. Could it be that there were robots in the previous civilization? That's one method of explaining how these incredible structural achievements were accomplished, on whatever timeline they were actually accomplished on? If we can't rely on our official history to tell us what the real story of the origin is behind these incredible structures? Why are there so many allusions and so many clues in this concept of robots or automatons that continues to endure with us to this day? Why is it such a powerful trope of science fiction? Is it all just coincidence? Is it all the result of creativity and imagination from writers? Or did they actually have some sort of inspiration? Much like Robert E. Howard had inspiration of previous civilizations that were different names, and yet the official account of Robert E. Howard was it was easier to invent an entire history than it was to simply go off of existing history. Maybe, perhaps. But when we look at things such as the Great World's Fairs or the World's Expositions or whatever particular title we want to call them, we see incredible achievements from our official historical account. We see structures that defy our ability to simply explain with the implements and means available at the time. If there was an entirely different civilization that had the capability to build these, and these were real authentic buildings, is it possible that they did actually have robots? Did they actually have automated beings that they could program for controlled outputs? And that's why we see such a consistency in the construction. The boilerplate robots, for example. Yes, there's actually an entire concept of robots during the Victorian times. Ah, yes, as if the Victorian times were not strange enough already. So many accounts of these robots existing, though, during Victorian times. Now, again, official history is not going to tell you that, yes, they had a robot during Victorian times. They merely tell you that it was a, again, product of science fiction novels and incredible imaginations. So, yes, the term robot invented by a Czech playwright in the 1920s is what we're informed, Rossum's Universal Robots, and yet we have references to robots from many different time frames, going all the way back to the time of Leonardo da Vinci. So what's the real account? Why are there hints or clues about there actually being robots that were showcased at these World's Fairs? Did that really happen? Or is it just misinformation? Or again, is it merely the product of a wild imagination? All these things could be possible, and yet if we really consider the incredible structures that were not obviously made from paper mache and cardboard, then we have to come with a different explanation. A different explanation being that perhaps there was some sort of means of automated labor that could consistently and constantly produce controlled results. Suddenly we have the explanation for the means in which many of these structures could have been constructed in a very small amount of time. There's so many different references, though, to the concept of what robots could be. And indeed, you'll even find, again, some science fiction or fantasy stories that tell you that robots were involved in everything. They had robotic horses, they had robotic people, they had different forms of robots that could do different tasks when needed. And if you were settling an area, or perhaps I should say resettling an area, and if you still had some limited means available of these robots, then perhaps they could have played a very integral role in bringing about the revival of a civilization after its destruction. Now again, these are just photos, they're not final definitive proof, or you could even say that they're photos of photos, and yes, with all the digital manipulation going on out there these days, intentional or otherwise, it becomes hard to tell what our true history really is. It becomes difficult to prove what really happened. Even the mainstream official account becomes much more difficult to verify. Is that simply an unintended consequence of all this advancement of what we call AI? And what do we do with AI now? Is AI really a sentience of robots? Or is AI now viewed more as simply the ability to produce pictures and video? I leave that to you. Perhaps they do have AI that's focused on operating robots, such as our great example of a robot from the film Metropolis. Ah, yes. So you see that these origins of what we think of as robots have been with us far longer than we like to believe. And oddly enough, this is something else that we don't seem to be taking any further currently. Now, it may be happening behind the scenes, we may not be aware of it. But consider how far technology could go with the development of robots. What would it really mean if you had a robot that was very close to being a human being? Or if you had robots that could replicate the movements of animals? I always think of the famous example of Stridor from the He-Man series. Oh yes, an animated cartoon that showed more creativity in many different ways with its plots and its characters in the early 1980s. But also consider what it could change for daily life and society if you had automatons that would assist with all forms of life. Of course, there's also a dystopian side of it, because what happens to the actual human beings when their lives become far too comfortable and far too easy, if you will, when you don't actually have to apply any sort of struggle. So again, it all comes back to that question, was it a matter of balance? Were robots only employed in certain segments of the civilization, constructing certain things? Perhaps other structures were still left to human beings. Again, we don't really know. It becomes a matter of speculation if it was in fact the account that in the distant past, or the not so distant past, the previous civilization did have access to automatons or robots. And that was really the answer to how they were able to achieve many of the great things that they achieved. Many of the structures and many of the examples of infrastructure that stays with us today. Even in the 1960s, we have examples of robots, or at least automatons, that NASA used to send into space to actually test space exploration. Of course, now, 60 years later, we just send mannequins into space for trips around the moon. It shows you how far we've progressed. But looking at many of these different images and considering these concepts along with what we're informed are just science fiction stories, it brings about an entirely different dimension to what the possibilities of civilization really could be. Because if you really do have no limits on your labor output, if you really developed a system that could actually sustain them with energy, you remove that whole concept of a labor force that you have to feed and that you have to provide water and also adequate time to rest. The answer tends to be, well, they just had forced labor. That's how we explain all these incredible structures. It was forced labor, and that's the easy explanation. And if you go with that and you accept that, and so long as you don't take into account the fact that you still have to sustain that labor force, and you also have to consider that that labor force at any point in time could pull what I like to call a Spartacus revolt, then yes, I suppose you could accept that explanation. But why would anybody accept living their entire life under such conditions? Especially since it would be so obvious. I mean, as I like to pose the question, why didn't Spartacus bite the guard's ankle much earlier in his life? Why did it take so long? I guess he just had to reach his breaking point. Things such as the World's Fair. And in Austria, is it possible that there were robots that were involved in the construction of these incredible structures? Such as the Great Rotunda. What's really the answer? As we go forward with our explorations, I want you to consider the possibility that robots were involved. And now we go to the bizarre account of the Emperor of the United States and the Amazing Bay Bridge. This is Joshua Abraham Norton. He's an individual who was alive in the mid-1800s, and he is famous for declaring himself as Emperor of the United States. Naturally, he resided in San Francisco, California, and he was an individual who was born originally in the United Kingdom, grew up in South Africa, and then relocated to the United States around the time of the Gold Rush. And he declared himself emperor after his business venture failed. Yes, just some random individual who was really no one declared themselves emperor. And oddly enough, when he declared himself Emperor Norton I of the United States, he issued proclamations where he talked about his imperial authority and how no one would impinge upon his imperial authority. And there you have his signature or type signature, Norton Emperor I. Yes, this all went down during the United States Civil War and after, and apparently he even issued currency in his name. Now, this is very, very odd because this is the 1800s when, according to the official historical account, the United States was accomplishing incredible feats. And yet, during that time, we had random individuals that just declared themselves emperor of the nation, issued proclamations and currencies. Now, you might think that this was just some crazy passing fad that everybody in California thought was really cool, but there were actual leaders, such as the King of Hawaii, who negotiated with this individual and appear to have recognized their authority as Emperor of the United States. It's bizarre in so many ways. And there's caricatures that exist of this individual actually having authority and being recognized in California. Very, very strange and very bizarre. It's as though there's nothing about the 1800s now that should really surprise us, because apparently Lincoln had no issue with this individual declaring himself Emperor of the United States and opted not to send any sort of military force to arrest him, or even just send one or two Pinkerton detectives to go arrest him, if you wanted to be conservative on your resources. It's a strange account, but why are we talking about this random individual who declared himself Emperor of the United States? Apparently he had the idea to build the Bay Bridge to connect what is today Oakland to San Francisco. Yes, some random individual who is really just role-playing as an emperor and dresses up as an emperor, issues proclamations in their own currency, which, by the way, apparently this currency was recognized in certain places in California. He comes up with the idea to build this incredible Bay Bridge to connect Oakland to San Francisco. How fascinating. And you'll never guess when they actually completed this Bay Bridge. Yes, in the early 1930s. In fact, they pulled off the construction of this Bay Bridge before the Golden Gate was complete. Very, very odd, and yes, the Great Depression, it certainly never stopped wondrous construction projects from being completed. Of course, perhaps you could say there's a little bit more of an explanation in California because for some reason everybody knew to go to California because there were jobs there. Didn't exactly have the internet in the early 1930s, but perhaps word of mouth spread so fast. And you can still see the Bay Bridge to this day, and yes, it was damaged in the earthquake in '89, and yes, they've apparently had to reconstruct or renovate portions of it, but for the most part it's still there. And it all came from the idea of this Emperor Norton I. At least that's what the official history tells us. It's also interesting that this guy who was role-playing as an emperor is still remembered to this day, and still captured in history to this day. And so if you're in the San Francisco area, check out the Bay Bridge, another wondrous construction project, 1933 to 1936. Or, if it was from the previous civilization, did they have the help and robots in constructing it? Through the rest of these explorations, consider that as we look at the World's Fairs.
Now once more I must ride with my knights to defend what was and the dream of what could be.
Welcome to the Restitutor Orbis channel, and today we're going to be exploring the Exposition Universelle 1889, or more appropriately worded, the World's Fair in Paris, France. The World's Fair in Paris, France is very intriguing because it really set the stage for a lot of the World's Fairs that would follow, and it would most certainly influence the Chicago World's Fair or the Columbia Exposition that would follow it, given their efforts to try to exceed what had transpired at the Paris World's Fair in 1889. And we start by looking at this little flyer of the Paris World's Fair, and we see the individual and their main architectural achievement, Gustave Eiffel and his eponymous Eiffel Tower. Now, why is this so intriguing to us? One of the reasons I haven't covered World's Fairs before is the buildings aren't there, but the Eiffel Tower is there. It was built in 1887 to 1889, 1,083 feet tall with the antenna, total weight 10,000 tons, number of rivets used over 2 million, and number of iron parts over 18,000. This is a very well-documented structure, and this is a structure that you can go visit today, which is one of the reasons I haven't covered World's Fairs so much in the past, unless it was a city exploration. But today we're starting our look at these great expositions. Now, we have to start by looking at Gustave Eiffel. Gustave Eiffel was actually an engineer. He was not an architect, but he had built a viaduct, and he was involved in several other major bridge projects in France, and he's most famous for the Eiffel Tower and even designing the Statue of Liberty. Yes, the same Statue of Liberty in New York City. The concept of the Eiffel Tower, though, is a similar story we're familiar with to where they had a design contest, and many different designs were submitted to build the Eiffel Tower. And indeed, the Eiffel Tower itself was something that many other nations wished to replicate afterwards, although even to this day, aside from some interesting counterfeits, there's really been no successful replication on a one-to-one scale of the Eiffel Tower. This is an interesting image of it, and this indicates that there might have been more planned for it. At least that's what we'll be told, that there was a greater plan for the Eiffel Tower, but they had to scale it back a little bit, such is the official story. Here is an image of a foundation of the Eiffel Tower. Very unique and fascinating image in and of itself, and isn't it interesting how it bears such a striking resemblance to all the other foundation images that we have? At least we have a foundation image. But to be fair, I will say this is probably one of the most well photographed edifices that we've looked at. Now, the Eiffel Tower is merely a lattice tower of ironwork and all the other varieties of architectural detailing that goes into it, even though it was designed by an engineer. During the design submission process, there were statements that they were going to build a very large guillotine because 1889 was supposed to be, or it was, the 100-year anniversary of Bastille Day, when they stormed the Bastille and removed the monarchy in France. And we saw what that led to if you watch the very antagonizing and not very interesting Napoleon movie by Ridley Scott. That's just my opinion. You can't really cover somebody's life in a 2.5-hour movie over that time frame effectively. Again, just my opinion. Staying on topic, though, you can see that we have many construction images of the Eiffel Tower. Now, why is it that the Eiffel Tower is so well documented? And we can see some of the other construction going on in this particular image, but I find it intriguing that we have individuals that are just running under the Eiffel Tower during construction. Well, that's just how they got things done, and it does show that there was some sort of activity going on during the ground. I don't know, what do you make of these images? Why is it that the Eiffel Tower is so well photographed? Now, it might intrigue you to find out that the Eiffel Tower was only supposed to last for 20 years. It was part of one of the conditions behind the design submission. It has many restaurants on the first floor, and there's a lot of square space on the first and second floor. And on the third floor, there was an apartment for Gustave Eiffel. So I guess that was part of his deal. Hey, you design this incredible tower, and you get to have quite an amazing apartment on the top of it. I suppose that's what it all boils down to. What was the real function and intention, though, behind the Eiffel Tower? Well, we're told that this was really just a vanity project to show the architectural capabilities of France and to showcase the World's Fair of 1889. Now, when we look at the Eiffel Tower, we can see that this is a structure that there had been nothing like it at the time. It was the tallest structure in the world when it was completed in 1889. And for reference, this is about 3 years after building number 1 in our explorations on this channel, the Iowa State Capitol, was completed. So it seems like they really had their act together in Paris, France in 1887 to 1889. We're told that the efforts to build this tremendous edifice were well beyond any of the other efforts at that time, that the construction techniques were revolutionary. And I think it's quite telling that even to this day, we really don't have anything like the Eiffel Tower. Yes, there are many replicas of it. We'll take a look at them a little bit later, but none of them actually compare to it on a one-to-one scale. And indeed, the only ones that do are half scale. And why is that exactly? Well, we'll be told because we can certainly achieve such a thing like this today, what they did in the late 19th century in Paris, France. We just opt not to for a variety of reasons. Look at how well it's lit up here. Now, we're also told that Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla attended the Paris World's Fair in 1889, as though they didn't have anything better to do at their time. Strangely enough, 1889 is when we're also told that Tesla was struggling with trying to get several of his inventions off the ground. But, he still had the time to mosey on over to Paris and see the Eiffel Tower. I mean, who wouldn't want to? This image here gives us an idea of one of the main viewing galleries, and it does provide some very panoramic views. Why wouldn't it? There's also the whole concept of how they did the lighting on the Eiffel Tower. So, was this a building that our civilization did, or was this a building that was already in existence? Well, let me know what you think in the comments. I'm just giving you the presentation that this is very well documented, as people like to say. And we have many different images that show the construction in steps. Now, this is the kind of documentation I would expect for many buildings, and yet it's rare. It seems to be the Eiffel Tower is the only one. Interestingly enough, though, the Eiffel Tower is the only building from the Paris World's Exposition of 1889 that survived. Well, I'm not sure what to make of it, but When you look at it, you can see that it is a very impressive structure, and we talked about it being a lattice-work structure. Now, to give you comparison, U.S. Navy battleships used a lattice-work structure on their masts, but the problem was they found they were susceptible to wind damage, and so they replaced them with a more modern tripod design on those very battleships that unfortunately were damaged or destroyed in the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. But back to the Eiffel Tower, you can see that it's a very intricate construction. And there's a lot of aspects that go into it with the machinery, the elevators, and yet this was all done by an engineer. And Gustav Eiffel, afterwards, he had a little bit of a tragedy in his career because he was wrapped up in a scandal when France was trying to construct their own version of the Panama Canal. And apparently Gustav was found guilty of misusing funds or misappropriating funds. He was sentenced to prison, but he appealed it and just had to pay a little bit of a fine, and everything was all fine and dandy, as it were. I find it intriguing, though, that he had an apartment complex on the third floor of the Eiffel Tower that was dedicated just to him, and that originally the structure was only supposed to stand for 20 years. Quite intriguing. Yes, you submit this award-winning design and you get to have your own apartment on it, but it's only going to be there for 20 years. The other interesting thing is that we're told the Eiffel Tower was derided by many artists and other individuals of influence in France at the time. Now, why would that be? Why would they deride something like this? Well, they said it wasn't very architecturally sound. It didn't reflect the true culture of France. Of course, now we know the Eiffel Tower is quite frankly a national icon of France. It's the most visited landmark in the world by many accounts. Now, I don't know, I can't verify the numbers, but that's what we're told. It should also be noted that we have a lot of design plans for the Eiffel Tower. So again, there's a couple facets behind this particular structure that exceed what we normally come across. We have many images of its construction, and we do have many different design photos. It's a very well-known, well-documented, the actual meaning, well-recorded, structure. And yet it's the only structure that survived the Paris World's Fair of 1889. And when we look at some of the other structures, we'll find that quite intriguing. It's also featured on the coin, and we can see its construction in phases on this particular coin. Now, what makes the Eiffel Tower interesting for other reasons, aside from the fact that the tallest structure in the world, it was widely featured in the Paris World's Fair, is that it actually had a lot of influence on the subsequent World's Fair in Chicago in the 1890s. Indeed, Daniel Burnham and his cohorts of many different architects knew that they had to exceed the achievement of the Eiffel Tower. And if you look at the well-documented accounts of the Chicago World's Fair, you'll find that one of their main aims was to out-Eiffel the Eiffel Tower. And therefore they found the guy named Ferris and built the giant Ferris wheel, which you can find images of in earlier explorations of Shilaga on this channel, or you can go to the Reddit and look at the images there of that very impressive Ferris wheel. And yet at the same time, the Ferris wheel did not survive, but the Eiffel Tower has. So I guess at the end of the day, Daniel Burnham was unable to out-Eiffel the Eiffel Tower because the Eiffel Tower is still there. In fact, no one else has really been able to out-Eiffel the Eiffel Tower to this day, but perhaps they're just not inclined to do so. There's many theories behind what the actual application of the Eiffel Tower could be. Is it some sort of power generator? Could it have other uses or applications? And we're told that it simply factored into radio communication, and for various reasons, France decided to not tear down the tower in 1909 and allow it to continue. And we've seen that it continues as the national icon. And indeed, when people think of France, they think of the Eiffel Tower. And why wouldn't they? To this day, it is a very impressive structure. And here we look at some of the plans and designs, and we can see that, to be fair, these are much more elaborate plans and designs than we've encountered before. One of the other reasons, though, that I haven't covered World's Fairs or expositions previously on the channel is there's been a very, how shall we say, interesting alteration in the availability of information concerning the World's Fairs. Now, as you may or may not know, I have operated in academia, and I can recall in the early 2000s, there really wasn't much focus on the World's Fairs. People talked about them, but they were mentioned in passing, especially in entire academic lessons that lasted a whole semester. Now we're talking from the United States perspective, a semester being 6 months, where there was little attention paid to the World's Fairs. It would be mentioned in passing, here's a few images, okay, let's go on to the next part of the lesson plan. There are far more interesting things going on in the late 19th, early 20th century than World's Fairs. But yet with the more recent attention devoted to World's Fairs, it seems as though information has become more available. Now let's look at some of the other applications of the Eiffel Tower. This is the one in Las Vegas, which is half scale. Now, it's interesting to me, though, that there are, do we call them replicas? Do we call them counterfeit? I'm not sure what the appropriate term is. Perhaps we'll just call them imitations. Imitation Eiffel Towers that are across the land. And indeed, the only actual towers that are somewhat similar in terms of lattice work are in Japan and China that actually match the Eiffel Tower 1-to-1, at least in terms of height. However, the intricacy of their construction is nothing close. Many of the other towers that you look at across the land are only half the height of the Eiffel Tower. So just go back to that one in Vegas. Why exactly did they not construct an Eiffel Tower that was 1-to-1 in Vegas? It's very interesting when you think about it. And don't tell me it's not as though Vegas doesn't have a lot of money. There were also attempts in the United Kingdom, right after the Eiffel Tower was completed, to build their own version of an Eiffel Tower, such as the caricature of this particular individual, Edward William Watkin. And this was his design for the United Kingdom's tower, or Great Britain's tower, that was going to exceed France. Well, unfortunately, for a variety of reasons, there was some financial difficulties, and the individuals trying to construct this particular tower just weren't able to pull it off. Now, they do have some other latticework towers that still stand in the United Kingdom, although I believe Blackpool here is the only one that still exists. But of course, it depends on which accounts you're actually looking at. But isn't it fascinating that it was so difficult to pull off a tower? Now, this is the Watkin Tower that they called a great folly. They were unable to continue financing it, and this was as far as they got. Although here it says the Wembley Tower on it, but it was the same design. So it seems they had multiple names for it, but funding ran out, and so the United Kingdom didn't build their tower to exceed the Eiffel Tower. And this is what it would have looked like if it was completed in terms of construction. So, interesting account. Now, could there be a different perception behind this? Did this tower really exist in the United Kingdom and then they pulled it down? Or is it just as we're told in the mainstream account? Well, let's go to the Paris World's Exposition, World's Fair, or Exposition Universal in 1889 proper. And we can see many of the same structures that we've seen in the Columbia World's Fair or the Chicago World's Fair that would follow it. Now, looking at many of these images, we'll see that there are a lot of intricate and elaborate construction efforts that are put into this. Now, they don't make such a big fuss about these being temporary structures. What they tell us is that it was merely an allocation of land. And that was the main issue as to why most, or actually all these structures were torn down. And indeed, the Eiffel Tower itself, we're told, was supposed to be torn down in 1909. Now, the Paris World's Fair is just like every other World's Fair. There are many different cultures that were represented there. They had basic human zoos, and I know that's more of a direct term, but let's be honest, that's what they were. They were human zoos. They were showcasing different cultures and different peoples as though they were trying to impress. That was the main perception you were supposed to have of those people. And yet you can see impressive structures everywhere you look, with many domes, arches, and wondrous fountains as far as the eye can see, much like the other World's Fairs. Now, this was the fifth of 10 World's Fairs held in Paris between 1850 and 1940. So it seems as though Paris was a very popular place to have World's Fairs or expositions, and why not? You know, it's a well-known, well-regarded, and romantic city. And indeed, when you think of the term romance, you think of Paris, France. What exactly was really going on, though, with this particular layout? Was this a genuine World's Fair? Or was this merely an effort in indoctrination? And when we go back and we look at the channel's theories behind what happened after the last reset with conflict, assimilation, and indoctrination, you think about the World's Fair as really being the final stamp of total indoctrination. This is what you're supposed to see, this is what you're supposed to think, this is what you're supposed to believe, and this is what you're supposed to embrace. Whether it's the structures, whether it's the society, or whether it's the perception of other cultures and societies. Because let's be honest, we still see all those same approaches to this day. We have publications that tell us exactly what's going on, and it tells us exactly what we're supposed to think about certain matters. Now, I've had a few individuals who've come up in the comments, and they tend to be a little disturbed because I'm not so much in the business of telling you exactly what to think. I try to give you a presentation and show you a different perspective, but at the end of the day, it's okay to me if you still want to embrace whatever it is that's going on with this World's Fair or all these city explorations that we've done. Now, why do I take that approach? because I believe there's something intrinsic behind the fact that there are many individuals who directly try to influence others what to think. Now, of course, you can make the argument, well, by giving this presentation, you're influencing people what to think. Yes, that is true, but I'm trying to leave as much choice to the individual as possible. Because I do consider the possibility that these World's Fairs could have happened as we were told that they happened, and they merely are just expositions that are well documented, that we went to all the trouble of building these intricate buildings across the land for all these World's Fairs to showcase it to vast amounts of the population. Now, a couple other interesting facts that were given about the World's Fair in Paris in 1889 is that it was one of the few that made a profit, and quite a hefty profit. We're told that it made a profit of 8 million francs. Yes, francs, the old French currency, prior to transferring to the euro. And it should be noted that if they had the euro back in the late 19th century, I'm sure it would have made a profit of 100 euros. You know, it's just one of those magical currencies that can do unique things. But when you look at all the galleries and the showcasings of different cultures in the Paris World's Fair of 1889, you can see, though, that it conveys a different message in the images and then in the account that we're given of it. Because why would anybody build these buildings to be temporary? And even if these buildings were being built temporary, now, again, I find it interesting with the Paris World's Fair, they don't really refer to these buildings being temporary. It's not to say that they're not. But again, you see the very elaborate and complex architectural and engineering processes that went into this fair. And you see the advertising that was behind it as well. So it creates many different questions more so than answers. And going back to the availability of information, what I noticed is that once alternative researchers started to really look into this, after doing it for a few years, suddenly many more images became available. Images of construction, images of organization. Now, don't you find that intriguing? One of the things I noticed about the very study of history when I started, and my focus area for everybody to know, was actually World War II. I noticed how, looking back at World War II, the perception of what really happened changed over time. One of the novels written by World War II is called Enemy at the Gates by William Craig. Now later, in the late 90s and early 2000s, there were a variety of researchers, mainstream researchers of course, who discredited Craig in his novel because they said that he was showing only a pro-German appreciation of what happened. Enemy at the Gates was about the Battle of Stalingrad, a major battle in World War II. And on review, they changed it. They said, well, he did not properly report on the performance of the Soviet army, so they had to change it. And so the entire perception of World War II and the performance had changed. Of course, now I'm sure it's changing back for a variety of reasons. But it caused me to question things because how can we have better and more detailed information available about an event as time passes? It's well known that as time passes, we lose the objective account about what really happened, no matter what technology we have available. And yet we're supposed to believe that as time passes, so let's just say it's 100 years after this World's Fair happened, we're supposed to have a clearer picture of it than we would have 20 years after it happened. And that happens all the time in history. Now, you'll have other explanations for that. It's like, well, society's changing and we have to reflect our current societal mores and values. And it's clear that what happened back then does not conform to how we feel about certain things now. So therefore, we have to have a slight alteration on the account. But what's really interesting, though, is the actual account of what happened suddenly becomes very blurred. And you start to realize that what you're looking at is not really an objective account. You're looking at things that have changed for a variety of reasons. Now, there are some plans to certain buildings in this World's Fair, and we have many artistic images that give you different impressions of what was really going on. One of the early comments I received on an exposition image that I posted told me about how run down some of the surrounding residences looked in certain images of the World's Fair. But then you compare and contrast that with the opulence of these buildings that were only meant to be temporary, because remember, even the Eiffel Tower was only meant to be temporary. It was only supposed to last 20 years, and sorry, Mr. Eiffel, you got to get out of your apartment and go find another place to live. You know, I'm not saying that he didn't have another house, but it's just quite intriguing to me. The gallery and technology that was also featured at the World's Fair is interesting because we talked about Edison and Tesla being there because, again, they had nothing better to do with their time, so they needed to make sure that they were present. And I'm just surprised they didn't tell us that Tesla didn't innovate some sort of precursor to the internet and then just simply discussed what they should do to wire things for electrical displays via wireless communication, because why not? But you look at a lot of this stuff with these World's Fairs, and you can see that the displays behind them, they do have a very powerful impression with them. And indeed, even the images are powerful. But the hardest questions we have to ask is, how exactly were these expositions being used to influence the minds of people when they happened, in terms of indoctrination? And how are they still being used to influence us to this day? Because if there's one thing that American documentary filmmaker Ken Burns is absolutely correct on, is he said, you judge a society, or at least you can determine a society by how it views its history. Well, if we're a society that wants to go back and change our history because of altruistic purposes that we didn't agree with the values at the time, what exactly does that say about us? Does that say that we're really trying to give an objective account, or are we simply trying to influence people in terms of what to think? And I don't know the answer to that. I can certainly look and see what's happening, and you can look and see what's happening in your own area. Tell me what you see and what you hear every day. Technology was very widely featured, and indeed Thomas Edison was there because his phonograph was being featured, the very first voice recording device. Ah yes, I remember that cartoon where they had him singing Mary Had a Little Lamb and then replayed it. It was just so heartwarming and touching. Of course, Thomas Edison's later experiments with electricity weren't exactly heartwarming or touching, unless you're some sort of sadomasochist. But you look at many of the other images, and you can see that this is a well-documented World's Fair. But one other thing that struck me about studying the Paris World's Exposition, World's Fair, all the other names that we have for it in 1889, they didn't really seem to highlight the individuals who were behind organizing it, laying it out, or many of the other architects. Indeed, the only name that's really featured is Eiffel and then some of the other visitors. Oh, it should be noted that Antonio Gaudi, who we looked at in our examinations of many different architectural wonders in Spain, made a guest appearance at this fair. I'm kind of surprised we didn't hear about German author Karl May making a guest appearance, when he wasn't busy writing about the American West. Yes, Karl May, German author, wrote about the American West. Very interesting stories, and yes, I am aware of them. You look at some of the other images, though, and again you see the same impression of opulence and the grandeur behind a World's Fair. Now, what are people really doing there? That always comes down to the question. Oh, yes, here we have a diagram, a patent, if you will, of Mr. Edison's phonograph. And that's all you really need for a patent, and your patent will be approved. Now, could I build one? Could you build one off of this patent? Let me know in the comments. This is one of the more elaborate phonographs, and I highlighted this one because this was made out of Edison concrete, because, all of Edison's other inventions weren't enough. He needed to do concrete as well. Maybe if Nikola Tesla would have innovated some sort of special form of concrete, he would have been remembered more. Although saying Tesla wasn't remembered is a contradiction. He is very well remembered, so that's not true. Well, Tesla died poor, and that means he loses the game of life, at least if you talk to the mainstream. Here's some of the tickets. Now, talking about how the Paris Exposition in 1889 actually made a profit is intriguing, because usually the story we're given with the other World's Fairs is they didn't turn a profit. They lost a lot of money. Well, what was really the goal? Money is always such an interesting thing, and people often say follow the money, but it's problematic when we start to realize that, by the mainstream account, money is very fluid. And they tell us that money's fluid. It's not like it's anything that's anybody's attempting to hide. There's certainly no conspiracy behind it. Yes, we can always loan more money. Governments can always borrow more money. Yes, we can always change the interest rates, and we can always pull all these strings to make all this stuff happen. Looking at some of these interiors, though, we can see, again, all the detailing that went into this. How much effort really went into this? And even if this was cheaper construction material, whether it was balsa wood, stucco, popsicle sticks, or what have you, how are they able to achieve such detailing? And why would you go to all this effort just to tear all this down? You're going to build a temporary building. It's only going to be there for 2 to 3 years, but they're going to tear it down. But don't worry, we're going to take a lot of pictures of it, so you should feel proud of it. I mean, even Eiffel settled for that. Yes, you're going to design this incredible tower. We selected your design from all the other designs. No, that guillotine just didn't cut it. And you're only going to have it for 20 years. Well, I'm going to be known and remembered because we're going to take a lot of pictures of it. Yay! Sounds like a great idea to me. I know I'm being a little facetious here, but when you look at this, for example, the interior of this dome and this great archway, does this really look like temporary construction? Does this look like something that wouldn't involve a lot of effort no matter what you built it out of? Because you can see an individual, you can see it to scale. It's just not something that's easily explained. And then there's all sorts of other ornate details that go into these structures. So once again, if we just had this kind of excess, this kind of opulence in the 19th century, and this is the mainstream account that's telling us this, I think it gets even worse and even more absurd when you consider the fact that these were temporary. Because again, this is very direct evidence, even from the mainstream account, that the society, the civilization, could achieve more in the 19th century than we can in the 21st century. And that goes down to not being able to build buildings like that. Now, of course, there's a slew of reasons. Well, we could do it. We just opt not to. We have safety standards. There's bureaucracy. Of course, we like to say money limitations, which is utterly hilarious because we can see that there's always more money to be found whenever we need to do something. It just depends who you are. But looking at some of these impressive structures across the Paris World's Exposition of 1889, we can find that it tells a completely different story. A story that there was somebody who put the effort into building these structures. Now you'll see other images like this that we've seen from other World's Fairs, and these are the images that became available later, in most cases, that showed us and gave us the impression that these were very cheap structures and that they were just waiting to be torn down by natural forces, wind, fire, or what have you. And people believe this. They believe it very, very directly that they'll repeat it. They'll repeat the same thing without doing any sort of analysis behind it. Because that's how you know knowledge happens. And a lot of times the larger structures, we're told, were just mere iron lattice work like this. And therefore they were very easy and cheap to construct. But yet you compare and contrast images like that with what we looked at before with some of the ornate detailing. And so it really becomes the very basis of a conflicted account. Now, there's also the other possibility that the World's Fairs are just that. They're meant to be conflicted accounts that are meant to distract us and meant to keep our attention on this. And that's one of the other main reasons why I've focused most of the explorations on the channel on the main structures that you can still interface with today, such as the Iowa State Capitol. Because frankly, the fact that the Iowa State Capitol was built 1871 to 1886 is still standing is a testament to what could be done in the 19th century. You can't deny that it's really there. You can't deny that you can still go and interface with it. Well, you can with the Eiffel Tower in Paris, although it wasn't planned to be. It was supposed to be torn down after 20 years. So make of that what you will. But then the other thing that comes down to my mind is the fact that this particular World's Fair doesn't seem to have any other individuals of notoriety who were associated with it, comparing and contrasting it with the Chicago World's Fair that would follow this one, where we had Daniel Burnham, we had Olmsted, we had all these other individuals of influence. We have this great dramatic story of how Chicago and New York City were vying for having the great World's Fair, celebrating Columbus's discovery of the United States. Oh, yes, here's one of our human zoos, as we have featured at the World's Fairs. I always find these images intriguing. The guy there on the left has a striking resemblance to Drax from Moonraker. Oh, I'm sure it's just a coincidence. Here's one of the images featuring technology, and balloons were quite prominently featured at the 1889 Paris World's Fair. Balloons, and you can find many images that show balloons going over it, and there's also images of balloons and airships that were being used quite practically at the end of the 19th and the early 20th century. One of the final things I'd like to mention, though, with the World's Fair in Paris in 1889, in addition to the fact that it didn't seem to have any other individuals of note who made it happen. I mean, we didn't really have a central individual like Daniel Burnham, like we did in the United States, is all the structures that were established and erected for it that were torn down because of the actual ownership or categorization of who had the property, the profit of this particular World's Fair. But then also, what did people come away from this really feeling at the time, if they did really attend this? Do you really get the perception of people that are going there that are going to have a good time like we associate with fairs today? Or is it something else entirely? It seems to reflect the whole concept of indoctrination. That seems to be the one consistent facet behind all these World's Fairs. That the real message behind them, the real intention behind them, is indoctrination. This is what you're supposed to think. This is what you're supposed to think on. And the fact of the matter is, nobody was really thinking on World's Fairs at the end of the 20th or even at the start of the 21st century in a lot of academic circles. They just weren't really considered important. There were other more prominent quote-unquote watershed events that happened in history. Nobody's really focused on the World's Fairs. And so as a result, we'll be told, well, the information just wasn't available, photos weren't available. Well, there's one thing I'll remind you all with photos. We know that right now we have the technology to reproduce any photo, black and white and color, to show us essentially anything. we also have the technology to produce video that can really show us anything. Now, is it possible that we always had this technology to alter images to portray a particular account? Now, I'm not saying or suggesting that anybody would do this intentionally, but we know for a fact that it's done in entertainment circles. It's done to produce us wonderful films. Remember that this World's Fair in Paris was all about celebrating the storming of the Bastille that had happened 100 years earlier and was depicted in great summary in the recent Napoleon movie. Okay, I'll stop beating up on that one. But what's it really telling us about history and ourselves? And we're even told that many monarchs across Europe refused to attend this World's Fair as it was dedicated to removing a monarchy and committing regicide. It would have been a bad dream for Thomas Hobbes when he wrote Leviathan. But you can see that there is so much more behind the images in this World's Fair that show you that a lot of effort went into it. You get the very aspect of conflicted account in many of these images where you see what appears to be rather rapid construction mixed with very detailed construction. You get the impression almost as though you're supposed to be confused, that you're not supposed to know exactly what to make of this, and you're supposed to spend a lot of time thinking about this. But where I think the real point of our exploration and our focus should be going forward is trying to answer the question behind what was the true purpose behind the World's Fairs. And if we look at our previous theory of how conflict, assimilation, and indoctrination were applied after a reset, then suddenly the World's Fair makes total sense. This is the prime tool of indoctrination. After we've destroyed the remaining enclaves after the last reset, after we've assimilated the population into their new roles where they're supposed to be in the land and what they're supposed to be doing, now we indoctrinate them. We show them exactly how things are and how they've always been. We give them a historical account. And this is not only what they believe, but this is what they know to be true. And as a result of knowing it to be true, they will simply engage in the act of repetition for their entire lives, and no one will question it. And perhaps the most disturbing thing about exploring these expositions is just how easy it is to achieve this. And you can see it every day in your life. Well, we're going to continue looking at the expositions. I hope you enjoyed this exploration, because I think we have a lot more to do when it comes to looking at these expositions. But what we're really going to focus on is trying to answer the question behind their purpose. And there's a lot of details to look at it. Well, thank you for joining me. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Restitutor Orbis's live stream for this week, where we're talking about expositions. Let's see what we've got out there so far. Welcome, Sean P. Hey, Rod Tech. Hey, Logan 5. Good to see ya. Hope you've renewed. Hi, Many Fires. Good to see ya. Just blaring. Welcome, Jamie. Good to see ya. Hello, OIC. Kathy, welcome. Hey, Shangly. Hey, Rebecca B. Good to see ya. And let's see who else we got. Danis McManus, Sherry Pretty, Freestyle, Vormagaven, Dr. Maniac Vaughn's Truth, Rob Max. All right. Well, it's good to see everybody. Hey, Leighton Lexicon. Give everybody a chance to get logged in. So we're going to run this live stream a little bit different than some of the other ones that I've operated, because I thought we could get a little bit more out of doing a bit more of an interactive discussion, because expositions are quite an intriguing topic to discuss. And yet at the same time, there might be a much more insidious purpose behind them, because it's interesting how we go on in time and we have more alternative researchers looking into expositions. And certainly they've been one of the top topics that we've had. Let's see what else we have. IC1, Brown Dwarf, Frank Gotts, Unacceptable Living in Left Field. Oh, that's a good one. Laura Painter, Leonard Magnuson, Mr. Beast Fan, Just Blaring. Good to see all of you. So when we look at some of these images of the expositions, and we're going to start with everybody's favorite, the Chicago World's Fair, the Columbia Exposition of 1893. We're going to consider what the purpose behind a lot of them was, and we're going to look at them, and I'm also, of course, looking for your feedback, because perhaps the most interesting thing, and I think it was Howdy Mikowski who did some great work on this, is really analyzing what we have when we look at some of these images, because we have some bizarre images when we talk about these expositions. So right now we're looking at the Chicago World's Fair, one of the overall images that we have from it. Now, of course, it looks to be just a painting, but we see some of the large buildings that we're familiar with, the administration building, the big statue of Columbia, all the waterway that they worked in there. And this was in Jackson Park, which was a swampy area in Chicago. And they managed to get this going pretty quick. So off to bed. Hey, I understand. It's that time of the evening. So anyways, so this is the overall image of it. Let's take a look. Now, you might have seen this. This is the Ferris wheel. Now, we did a video earlier this week on the exposition in Paris, France, the one that preceded this one, where they built the Eiffel Tower. Well, guess what? The Ferris wheel was supposed to be the answer to the Eiffel Tower. Yes, I have, and I have to watch a lot more of it. So, yeah, exactly. Built a city of palaces by a lake. Now, does anybody know how long it took them to build that? To do the entire Chicago World's Fair. Hey, Sooner West, good to see you. Yeah, precisely. So we have this Ferris wheel here, and this was supposed to be the mainstay of the Chicago World's Fair. This was supposed to be the item that out-Eiffeled the Eiffel Tower. What do you think of it? Yeah, 19 minutes. That's a good one. Yep, pretty much. Bueller. Oh, yeah, Chicago. You're absolutely right. Well, officially, they were supposed to have it done within a year, but they needed more time because the Chicago World's Fair was supposed to be the 500th anniversary of Columbus discovering America. At least that's what the official story tells us. But what are your thoughts when you look at this particular Ferris wheel? And a question I have for everybody is, has there ever been a Ferris wheel this large since? Yeah. Well, and it's kind of surprising that they actually admitted that they needed more time to set up for this World's Fair, because usually the story we get is, yes, we could build this incredible edifice or an entire World's Fair in 6 months. Yeah, that's right. Oh, yeah. Yeah, exactly. Ooh, Ferris Apartments. Yeah, that's true. Ferris Bueller's Day Off, Ferris Wheeler. You get it? Ferris. Oh. Would it be? 500 years or 400 years? Do you know, and good catch on that, D Ward, do you know that there are some ephemeral materials that say that 1892 was supposed to be 500 years? Now, they claim that was an error, but good catch on that one. I'm glad to see you guys are paying attention. That's the whole point. Yep, 1492 to 1892, that's 400 years. 1992 is 500 years. So the better question is, why didn't we do a World's Fair in 1992, you know? I mean, it was 500 years and all. That they will. Oh, yeah. Good old Olmsted and all of his wonderful achievements. Now, does anybody know what Olmsted was famous for in New York City? And there was also that story about how New York City was a bit of a competition for the location of the Chicago World's Fair. So here's one of our first images that we see. Now, what's the story that we're given about these buildings? Oh, yeah. It's a great book there, Sherry, too. You know, I had the signed edition of it back when I was still collecting books, the Easton Press hardcover. But yeah, it is a very intriguing story. That's exactly right, Jamie. You're right. Well, and you know, and that's the other thing, being somebody who's in history, you know, of course you'd say, oh, well, what's the difference between 500 and 400 years? Well, not a lot and quite a lot, depending on who you're asking. Because remember, what we see from the mainstream is when they don't want us to know or understand something, they add time and they add distance. Oh, what's this one? Yeah, exactly, Kathy. Different calendars, different dates, so who knows? Oh, yeah, that's true, Jerry. And welcome. You got it. Shangly, Central Park. That's what Mr. Olmsted was known for doing. So when we look at this particular image, you know, we're told that these are temporary structures. This is the administrative building. Now, when you ask the question, why would someone go to this kind of detail for a temporary structure? Now, the statue here might look a little bit different, maybe a little bit more temporary, because we're told it's plaster and they use stucco and a lot of white paint, and it was just an elaborate paint job. Oh, good to see you, Old World Hamster Wheel Cranes. Yep, we're right down your wheelhouse here. Welcome, Warrior Class USA. Yeah, exactly. Lagoons and fountains out of cardboard. That's right, Sean P. And doesn't that kind of stuff stand up to water really well? And let's not forget the great winds of Chicago. Yeah. Paper mache, balsa wood, popsicle sticks, the usual construction. Yeah, that's a good point, OIC. We'll take a look at that here at the end in terms of just how many expositions we had in the 19th and early 20th century. There were quite a few. But what are your thoughts when you look at this administrative building right here? Just take a look at it, and what kind of detail do you see in it? And do you see any other issues with this particular image? Because we're constantly doing image evaluation, and if anybody's watched Howdy Mikowski, he does a really good analysis of a lot of the photos of the World's Fair. But one of the phenomena that you encounter is it's very difficult to see exactly what's going on with a lot of these photos. Oh yeah, exactly. And they are very beautiful buildings. But I think we have to remember they are images of beautiful buildings. Oh yeah, a lot of those strange coins. Thanks for calling that out there, Nixon Owl. Nixon Owl, if I'm saying that properly. Well, come on now, Rebecca. They had infinite amounts of money. It was the 19th century. No worries whatsoever. Yeah, that's always the other good question, Jamie. Good to see you, Brian. Welcome. Oh yeah, we'll be taking a look at that one. Well, let's look at a few more, because this is just the first one. So here's another image of the Ferris wheel, and this just gives you an idea of the size and immensity of it, and I know a lot of other mainstream alternative researchers have done looks at World's Fairs, and they've always talked about, what are you really doing there? And you get the image that they're about indoctrination, and that's kind of the conclusion we came to when we looked at the Paris World's Fair. That happened in 1889, 4 years before this one. Here we go. Here is one of our wonderful construction images, although when we look a little closer, we can tell that this is not really a photograph, but rather this is a drawing of construction. As Johnny Depp said, it is a drawing of a key. It's not a key. But why do you think we even have drawings like this? Yeah, not only a model, it's a drawing. Yes, you are correct. Absolutely. And we do have a lot of drawings and drawings that supposedly document construction here. Oh, what do we got here? Using your history timeline, I said the powers that be simply overlay their history on our ancient history. Could well be, Mac, and they could be a lot older than that, and that's always something that crosses my mind. Are some of those Art Deco buildings that we look at a lot older than we realize? Do we really know? It's hard to say. Yeah, and a lot of empty construction sites. That's a good point, too. What do we got here? Well, Brian, you can find a lot of bodies that are in catacombs underneath every major city across the lands. We haven't looked at Paris yet, but I've got that tab for an exploration. We're going to take a close look at some of the catacombs there. Hey, Corey, good to see you. Welcome. What I think the Ferris wheel is? Well, I'll give you my theory. I think that the Ferris wheel is merely a piece of machinery, much like a lot of the amusement parks, the roller coasters. They were involved in some sort of elaborate machinery. Now, is it about or was it about manufacturing of materials, or was it about power generation? Not sure. I could see it being either. Yeah, exactly. And it's not supposed to make logical sense, so. Well, it's good to see everybody coming on. And welcome to all of you. Hi, Elf from Serbia. Oh, yeah, beautiful place. And so it comes out. Well, we have a lot of drawings like this that show us this kind of construction. And then you have other images like this that give you the impression that there's a lot of people at the World's Fair or at the Chicago Exposition of 1893. And how many people were really there is one of the big questions that we have. And what's your understanding of it? How many people do you think attended one of these World's Fairs, or the Chicago World's Fair, for example? And Belgium, welcome. Oh, yeah. Hey, all you got to do is ask a question. If you want to know what I think about something, that's what the live stream's all about. Yes, I know in the videos I'm a little bit more of posing questions, but, the whole reason we have the live streams is interaction, so they afford it. The same way we can afford infinite conflict now. There's no limit to money, at least our concept of money. That's a very good question there, Eric, and that's something that doesn't really make a lot of sense about it. Were all the hotels filled? Yeah, exactly. Well, there were enough asylums to lock all the people in them, Rebecca, at least from what we look at. Ah, welcome, Heidi. Good to see you. They all lost money except for the Paris Exposition in 1889. That supposedly turned a profit, 8 million francs, give or take, if you believe the numbers. And then the Tennessee Centennial Exposition broke even. I think it made, I don't recall, what was it, a couple $100, if that. So really wasn't much. A lot of people you see in certain images, but yeah. And that's what it was. But the real question we have to ask is, what was the purpose behind these World's Fairs? So good to see you. What's our real story? Exactly. And in most of the pictures you see, there is a curious lack of people. But I think one of the most important things we realize is the images themselves are not consistent. Here's one of the more famous images that people tend to see, but how real is this image, and what is this really showing? You have this great overlook of the World's Fair with some of the very impressive buildings that are there. Yeah, definitely not economically viable. What movie was that in? That was in Falling Down, wasn't it? Not economically viable. Where's my sign? You know what, Kevin? That might have been what it was, too. Going away party. But I've seen different modifications of this image. I've actually seen, I think it was one different image that showed some sort of robot or artificial being in it. It was really strange. So superimposed without any doubt behind it. Well, yeah, nobody can ever go in the crypts there, truth and word. I was trying to get in the tunnels below the state capitol in Iowa, and that wasn't happening. So, yep, and you got it. Again, no people in the image. So it's giving you a conflicting account. Well, a lot of people attended it, but we see images where there's not that many people. Well, the buildings were very difficult to build, but they managed to pull it off. They needed a little bit more time. And that's the thing. You see wonderful buildings in the images. All right, let's take a look-see on that bridge, shall we? Yeah, it does look mighty empty, doesn't it? And here's the other thing we have to ask. Remember, we're just looking at an image. And one of the things we have to remember is an image doesn't prove anything. It doesn't disprove anything, because as we know, any image can be doctored or altered. Now, could this be a composite image? Did they have that technology back then? Yes, they did. They had the technology to composite images. And that's pretty rudimentary, but it looks pretty good when you can composite images. Yeah, exactly. Hearsay. Maybe, or maybe locked away somewhere else. We just don't know. And that's a really good question too, Sherry. And we'll take a look at how World's Fairs have changed over the years. So, yep, Photoshop down the road, and that's all you see with a lot of these images. So let's go to the next one. All right, does anybody know what we're looking at here? And 100 points if you do. I'll give you a hint. We kind of mentioned it at the beginning. But isn't this nice? You got the boats coming right up to it, like you're in Venice or something. Keep expecting to see Indiana Jones and Dr. Elsa Snyder show up. Ah, there you go, Mr. Beast fan. Now you're thinking. Well, I'll let you in on something. What's our real story? You often ponder and speculate that I may know a lot more than I let on. I'm actually aware of a historical image that contains 112 different composited images. I might have to show it on one of the explorations. You got it! Yeah, old Roman building. That's what it looks like, doesn't it? Now, what does it look like today? Are there any buildings from the Chicago World's Fair that survived? Yeah, you never know, radioactive. We just might. See right there. Look, art. Now, does anybody remember what was the most powerful scene from the film Ferris Bueller's Day Off? Yeah, this one does look a little bit more temporary. You're right, in some respects. But is that the way it really looked? Or is that merely image alteration? Yeah, we're told it's burned down. And see, this is what the whole point behind looking at a World's Fair is. Good one, Lola. Well, you know, you got to keep it simple in some respects. Oh, there you go, Center West. Yep, the museum scene. And that's really a scene that feels very out of place to a lot of people in Ferris Bueller's Day Off. And yet it's the most powerful scene in the movie. You know, where they actually go into an old world building. They're looking at art. Cameron looks into himself when he looks into the piece of artwork. Ooh, really? Is that true? But you have a really nice house then, Rebecca. Yeah, well, you know, Sean, they didn't have enough money for 5 to 6 at that time. So, yeah, the parade was an interesting scene, too, now that you mention it. That's where you can kind of say that it's breaking the fourth wall. Well, just imagine, you know, in the day. So, all right, let's go to the next one. Now, here's where you kind of see the whole temporary nature of it broken up. You know, you have some hints of things being temporary in this image, but then you see this interesting ornate detail on these columns, but then it doesn't go all the way to the bottom. So, what's really the story here with this image? And then when you look at this dome back here, there's all kinds of problems with this image whenever you look at this dome in different images. So, yeah, there should be 7 lions there, right? Oh, yeah, exactly. What are you seeing with these pillars? What are you really seeing in this image? I mean, are you getting another conflicted account? Because then you look over here at these arches. How much can we trust this image? Can we trust this image to be something that reflects reality? Ah, yeah, repair work. Oh, yeah. You know, they were going to make a TV series out of that one, too. Devil in the White City. Nope, 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 nope. Not even in our temporary buildings nowadays. In fact, we don't even bother with temporary buildings. No, that's just it. And you see, that's one of the real issues why I haven't touched expositions on the channel so far, because most of the buildings we can't verify. All we can do is we can look at the images. Well, and since we know we can't trust images, then what difference does it make? You know, is this a real image? Is this a modified image? Did this building really exist as we see it? Or is it just a different layout? I mean, those are the kind of questions we need to ask about these World's Fairs, these expositions, because we know it's stated to us that we have to have a certain perception about these. So, nope, I don't know who you're talking about or any investigations. Okay, Chuck Norris. This must be your first live stream. Yeah, it would appear so. Yes, I'm being facetious. I'm well aware. I follow many different alternative researchers, so yes. What do we got here? Well, and, you know, here's the thing. This was so long ago, we just don't know what really came from all this. Now, here's where you can see the image of a little bit of blurriness, and, of course, the people who are onto photographs will tell you about all of it. And they'll tell you about, well, this is proof that there were photographic limitations at the time, and yet we've seen other images where we don't have photographic limitations, so... That's a good one there. Yep. Here's the problem, though. If you just continue to demolish the narrative and you don't go anywhere with it, then you can find yourself stuck in what's called a recursion loop. And I'm starting to speculate that's really what the World's Fairs are about. And it's also interesting how different topics are received in different ways. For example, I hadn't done an exposition video before, and yet this was the first exposition video that I had done. And yet the way it was received was quite fascinating. So, well, and I think recent experience should tell you that we need to make sure that we're careful with the images and then what we're listening to, because guess what? Alternative research is monitored very closely by the mainstream. And so if you think that there's not some kind of response to people thinking for themselves, well, think again. And I think that's the real purpose behind the World's Fairs and the expositions. So, Yes, indeed. Now, I think I'm starting to become wise to what is happening, so that's okay. Precisely. Well, and I'd be careful before I trust any sort of artificial intelligence on anything, but that's up to everybody. If that's what they want to trust, then so be it. If you think you're going to get an artificial intelligence that's designed by the mainstream and it's going to tell you the truth, have at it. Here's a transportation building, and this is where we have many of these different arches and everything else in here. Well, because it was just really difficult. They didn't have the ability to do it. Yeah, and I think that's what you're on with about that one, Jamie. So, well, thanks, Buzz. I appreciate that. But it's when you see these kind of images like this is again another question. Was this real, or was this just a mock-up? Or was this just an altered image? Yeah, exactly. Could be, Kevin. Could be. We just don't know. Yeah, or, has it been 10,000 years, or has it been even longer? I just don't know. And here's another one of these images where we see these buildings, and you look at something like this. I mean, does this really give you the concept or the perception of something being temporary, or what? I'm not sure. Well, and you know what? I think that's the best theory right there, Lola. Before TV to educate the masses, this was the display. But did this really happen? Or was this just something that was presented to us that happened? That's what we don't know. Because there were a lot of World's Fairs in the 19th and early 20th century. What do we got here? Sydney Town Hall? I got Sydney on the list there, Jordan. I got Sydney on the list, so just bear with me. I've got Canada on the list too. A lot of things that are coming up. Oh yeah, there's a lot of places in Illinois. There's no doubt about it. Yes, they were. And they were also used as detention centers to get rid of people who weren't going along with what they were supposed to go along with. Oh yeah. There you go. You're catching on. And that's one of the main reasons why you don't want to be encouraged to rely on it. Oh, what's this here? Oh, yeah, the early version of Skype. Yes, I have seen that, and I have heard of that, and that's very interesting in and of itself. Oh, don't worry, Jamie. Don't worry. See, that's why if anybody ever worries about running out of content, that's just never a concern. There's just always so much more to do, more things to look at. Here's one of the interesting images that you don't see too much of, and this is where they're showing the balloon rides. When I did the Paris exposition exploration, some people were commenting on the airship rides and how the Eiffel Tower was used for that, so that was quite fascinating. Well, please do. I'll never say no to images to take a look at, so. Oh yeah, there's a lot that stands out down there in Arkansas and Louisiana as well, so. Yeah, it's a good question, Buzz. I mean, I really don't know. I mean, did this really happen 130 years ago, or did it happen some other time? Was it really 500 years after Columbus discovered America? I think that joke went over everybody's head, so I'm just going to spell it out. The whole concept of Columbus discovering America is just utterly and totally absurd, and whether it was 500 or 5 billion years ago, it doesn't really matter. It's an event that people refer to, but then what have we spent the last 20 years doing with it? Well, we don't recognize it anymore. It's not Columbus Day in the United States anymore. So it's always the whole back and forth on everything. You're supposed to give all this importance to this particular day, but that doesn't happen. So, yeah. As always, make of it what you will. Oh, yeah. Well, I think to be going a little slow tonight, so okay. Now here's an interesting one where we have this nice obelisk. Remember all those obelisks that we have in Rome? If we've got some in the tower, and this is supposed to be Egyptian land, you know, because they have our human zoo, the World Fairs, which were another. Hey, Allison Chains, good to see you. Yeah, there's a lot to see in that movie, although I got to admit, sometimes it can be a little hard to watch. Okay, you guys got me back now. I just reset. Can everybody hear me? You guys have me back now? I was having some connectivity issues. All right. Yeah, I don't know. I guess it's another example that what I'm talking about, somebody doesn't dig what I'm talking about. But that's okay. I'm going to stay with you as long as I can, and we'll keep going. So, but this is another one of those quote unquote human zoos that we had, and they were trying to show us, you know, what everything was with how cultures were across the world, because I think that's one of the things that were with the World's Fair is they were trying to indoctrinate us with all sorts of different issues. So, oh yeah, no surprise. You know, count how many glitches, count how many people try to subvert what I'm trying to talk about by talking about something else. You know, we already had about, what, 3-4 situations. So, yeah, you're not supposed to talk about this. You're not supposed to think about this. Just take what you're supposed to be given. Yeah, glitch in the matrix. So, all right, we'll keep moving. Okay, what do you think of this image? Now, isn't this one of those stunning images? Where is it now? We'll see that here at the end. It's definitely not around. Oh, yeah. Nice street lamp there, too. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. That's what they say, Jamie. That's what they say. No. It's all good. Don't need a moderator. We're fine. Hey, Scottish Tart, good to see you. It's all good. You showed up at the right time. So, you got it, Kathy. Minimal people. Amazing buildings, but minimal people. So, are these models? Are these models in an image in people? And you see all kinds of problems with it. So, let's go to one of the more impressive ones. So, here we see this very interesting picture, if you can call it that. And does anybody know what this gigantic building was called? Or at least what we're told it was called. And I always liked how John Levi would call it, it's the building, because he would make fun of the very rudimentary names that they had. So, well, Angel Luck, welcome. Harryhausen built it. Ray Harryhausen. I know you have old world hamster wheel cranes. I know you have. We'll give you credit for that. It's very painful for me to watch that movie, okay? You have to remember, I'm a human being here. There's only so much I can take. Good to see you, KC933. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, it's all stucco, right? Yeah, Grand Central Station. That's a good guess. That it was. No one really remembers the exact images. They talked about the World's Fairs in historical circles. I tried to cover that a little bit when I talked about the Paris Exposition. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Here's another one, and once again, you have kind of the same issue here where it looks like the people have been superimposed in. We've got some incredible, impressive figures. Oh, by the way, does anybody know what the gigantic statue was called at this World's Fair? I'll give you a hint. It's in the name. Tax office. Oh, yeah. That's right. Yeah, staff equals stucco. Nope, Rome might have been if we believe it was in its glory days, but whatever. Oh, yeah. Well, thanks, Allison. I appreciate that. Yeah, and that's where you have to go right there. It's just the technology that you're seeing in this. You know, I mean, what are we looking at? Are we looking at genuine remains, or are we looking at photos of remains superimposed with people? Is there some other story that's being told? You know, it's hard to say with this. And since we're about at the midpoint of the live stream, please hit that like button as we battle our way through different issues and diversions, and that's no problem. But I appreciate everyone being here and joining me tonight. These are always fun discussions. Yeah, canals and fountains, all part of what they built. So they just didn't build the buildings. They brought in water and fountains and everything else. I always thought this image was interesting. Isabella, Queen of Spain, and then Columbus, because, you know, it was, supposedly the 400th anniversary of Columbus discovering America. And why the heck you'd celebrate that, who only knows, but whatever. Well, thanks, Quest, and welcome. Yeah, that's what they say. That great Chicago water. Is it? I thought that was Friday night. Well, yeah, Rebecca, they have to be tall enough. So let's move on. So this is how the buildings all ended up at the Chicago World's Fair afterwards. This is what we're told, that there was a fire and they burned down, you know, because there's all kinds of fires in Chicago here and there. Oh, yeah. Colossus is absolutely right. And isn't this an image that is, how shall we say, problematic? But yeah, that's what they tell us. Massive fires, you know, all that stucco went up like a Roman candle, get it? Yeah, he does, doesn't he? Yeah, another cow, right? You know, the cow caused the one in the 1870s, and then another cow caused this one in the 1890s, so down it went. Yeah, precisely. Now, this is kind of an interesting image because it's really hard to see faces when you look at the World's Fair. And when you see faces, you see really odd faces in any of the images that you have. So I know that's just the way people looked at the time, or is there something else going on? I mean, look, like we've got wheelchairs here and, you know, very elaborate wheelchairs, and they're just being pushed around. I mean, it's really hard to say what is going on with some of the people here. Yeah, that's exactly right, Jamie. It looks dodgy. I remember one of my favorite professors that I taught with from Australia, he always had a saying, yeah, it looks dodgy. It's kind of dodgy. It's a dodgy plan. You have a dodgy lesson plan. Oh, yeah, someone remembers that story from Indianapolis, the smoking pigeons. The pigeon dropped the cigarette. That's a good story. Oh, yeah. You're right, Shannon. They do look like grandparents. Well, actually, that's what Columbus was waiting for, so he could be financed, because, you know, war is expensive. Fortunately, war is not expensive now, but it was expensive back then, apparently, or so we're told. Yeah, I think you're on with that one, Jeff, so. Oh, and here is the construction of the Ferris wheel, the big giant Ferris wheel. What do you think of this lovely construction photo here of the Ferris wheel? Yeah. All the fun of the fair, that's right. See, this is awesome. These are the kind of comments that really show you what it's all about. Yeah, you're probably more on to that one there, Corey. I mean, especially right before World War II and during World War II, right? I mean, why did the United States ever go away from the war economy? It was so profitable. Profitable, get it? Profitable. Oh, yeah. Well, there you go. And don't forget, you're a cowboy who's also an architect who can build these incredible things, so. Some of them lasted longer than that, Lola. Some lasted almost 2 years. Looks dodgy. Yep, I'm with you. Now, speaking of dodgy, so this is one of the displays, one of the human zoos. But then what have we got back here? Speaking of dodgy. Yeah, Ferris wheel. They didn't out-Eiffel the Eiffel now, did they? Yeah, Westman, and supposedly it's still buried there. That's someone confirmed, although I can't attest to that. I didn't actually see it. And I'll admit, I'm not exactly a person who just trusts Felder Carb equipment right off the bat. But that's just me. Yeah, and that's what I speculated earlier. What's our real story? You know, it's either some power generation or manufacturing device. So, yeah, there you go, Rebecca. Disney animators. That's right. They just didn't color that one in. Yeah, painted or drawn image. Not so good right there. Oh boy. Let's see if we got any more on this one. So this is really odd here as we're looking down the main thoroughfare. What, are they all dressed to go to a funeral or what? Very strange. And here you see an interesting mix in terms of quality with what you can see with the eyes, you know, comparing and contrasting the statue, the buildings, the administration building, the dome. Oh yeah, that's true, Many Fires. That's very true. Well, when do the cranes ever do look real, right, Jeff? Oh yeah. And he's done some great coverage on the whole thing. Yep, spikes on the roof, just except on the administration building. And that is what it gives you the impression of. And don't you find it interesting how these AI generated images seem to lack a lot of quality? Oh yeah. Yep, I think you've seen all there is with this one, so we'll move on. And here's another one of the images of the fire after the fair that decimated many of the buildings. And then, of course, we got our statue right here. Statue of Columbia. You know, I still wonder if they're ever going to find what happened to the stolen statue of Germania from the Germania building in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I might have to go back to that one. I have not. I watched the original one. I'm trying to remember who narrated it. Oh, yeah, well, you know, 60-foot gold statue, that's no problem. Here's actually looking at the center bar of the Ferris wheel. Good image of it. And you get an idea for scale on this image. That's right, thanks, Gene Wilder. I forgot about that. You know, the real Willy Wonka. Welcome on, world. Good to see ya. Well, thanks. I appreciate that. I try to do the best that I can. Yeah, Lady Liberty. You know, maybe the Ghostbusters should have brought the Statue of Columbia to life. Wonka history books, that's right. Yeah, and you know what? You're absolutely right, Rebecca. And they always seem to be readily available, and that's why we have to question the authenticity of these images. We also have to question the availability of a lot of these images. So, anyway, let's go to the next series of images, and we'll go to one of the darker portions of the World's Fair. So give me 1 second. I'm going to pull that up. And here we go. Share screen. And can you see this remarkable gentleman here? Wasn't that the Statue of Liberty? I'm trying to remember. So many statues, it's hard to keep track. Yeah, it was about 2000, Lola. There's never been a Ferris wheel in capacity that could compare to it. So, oh yeah. So does anybody know who this individual was? Hey, somebody did their history, or at least what we're told is history. Yes, this is Mr. H.H. Holmes, Dr. H.H. Holmes. Considered the first serial killer in United States history and prominently featured at the Chicago World's Fair. What Holmes was famous for was that he had a murder home constructed. Hey, Corey, thanks. I appreciate that. It's my dad. Jeez. Oh gosh. Oh boy. Westworld, yeah. I really liked the first season of that, but after that, boy, it completely lost me really fast. Oh yeah, Robbie Benson in character. So anyway, what Mr. Holmes was famous for was that he had a house constructed that was really just a murder house. And it was supposed to be a hotel, for all the people that were attending the World's Fair, the millions and millions that came by. Half the population of the United States went to the Chicago World's Fair. And he apparently had some secret rooms and had many different contractors, so nobody was really aware of what was going on in this building. So there might be a hidden compartment here where somebody would be murdered, then the bodies would be taken down here. It was very, very morbid. And this was considered one of the big revelation events of the World's Fair. It's kind of like how the 60s ended. I was like, oh my gosh, it ended with this terrifying murder. Oh, that's a good call out there, Foster. Good point. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. My opinion. You're right. Absolutely. Hey, if you like the subsequent seasons, have at it. I'm just saying the show lost me after the first season, but, I'm rather unique in my entertainment tastes, so. Yeah. Holmes was Jack the Ripper and something else. Hey, Silver Mist, welcome. Oh, yeah, you can definitely look into the direct history of H.H. Holmes, and that's sort of how it ended, so. Yeah, people check in, but they don't check out. Yeah, Hotel California, Hotel Holmes in Chicago. So, there was also a big political assassination, but it was nothing compared to President McKinley getting killed in the Buffalo World's Fair. So, anyway, let's see how we're doing on time. Okay, well, let's take a look at the Buffalo World's Fair, shall we? So let's get that up. Give me 1 second here. And be prepared to see some more interesting images. Share screen. All right. So this is the Buffalo World's Fair, 1901. And for those of you who've been with the channel for a while, this is supposedly one that my great-grandfather attended, though I can't verify it. So, yeah, H.H. the architect, well, he was good at using contractors. So we're back in Buffalo, New York, and this is right next door to Niagara, which we explored recently on the channel. So, yeah, exactly. And you would think that's what would come out about it. So, well, yeah, they do, don't they, Kathy? So I guess that matches us being in Buffalo, New York. So, hey, there you go, Jamie B-side, you got it. So 1901, and had some wonderful architecture at this fair too. Although they tell us the same story that the buildings were temporary, although they had them well lit because, guess who was involved with that? Who was involved with being everything? Yeah. Well, you're talking about psychopaths that we're told are at the individual level, because we have no psychopaths in government, right? Yeah. Isn't that interesting? Good call out there, old world hamster wheel cranes. Good observation. Yep. You got it, Jamie. This was another Tesla specialty, so I guess, when he went to Paris in 1889 and he had all this time on his hands, he decided to go up to Buffalo and do it too. Yep. More canals, more lights. This is a nice one here. Although, again, how real is this image? Another question we have to ask. And what are we really seeing with it? Next 10, next 100 years, I don't know. I don't know the timeline, that's the problem. I mean, I can't give you a guess because I don't know the timeline from the last one. Yeah, I think it's a photo that's been doctored a little bit there, Kathy. Oh, yeah. Like, here's another one of these images where we have this elaborate and ornate architecture. Different kinds of resets are happening all the time, but I think he's asking about a hard reset, and that's just what I don't know. Yeah, that's true. Some perceptions, we are in the middle of one, so. Good to see you, Tara. Welcome. No, and maybe it didn't, and maybe that's the whole thing. You think it's one catastrophic event, and the reality is it's just going on over time for all we know. Yeah, exactly. Maybe. Let's look at some more. So this is the stadium. This is where they staged a lot of great events. They showed sporting events. Hattie Mikowski did a great exploration of his own on the origin of the main sporting events in North America: hockey, basketball, football. It's all interesting when you look at how those all came about. So, oh yeah. Well, you know what the truth is, Barrick? They actually did it with the way they publish books and different editions of books. And then, you just had the old book barbecue when you needed to get rid of things, or you just said that you didn't have space in the library. And to be honest with you, and much to my shame, I took part in that myself when I was at the university. So I can confirm that it does happen. Now, it's not illegal, it's not immoral, it's not unethical. It's because there's only so much space for books. So, books had to be destroyed. Oh, yeah. And they also staged a lot of the great battles, giving the whole perception of the American West. But you just see the ornate details in this, and you can tell the materials from the picture. I mean, is this really a temporary structure? I mean, this image doesn't give that indication at all. Yeah, true. Oh, yeah, Darius. Well, they had to keep that one going. Now, what's interesting to me is you never saw that when you looked at these photos prior to, about 2017. Yeah, exactly. Stage the battle. Ding, 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 ding. Somebody's on it. Yeah, it could be. Whatever its original purpose was. Here's another image of it. And here you can see how well decorated and how ornate and detailed the columns are. I mean, even if you are building this with stucco or plaster or whatever, I mean, how do you get it to this level of detail? It just doesn't make any sense. Yeah, that's probably the way to say it, too. Oh, yeah. Easy peasy, and they could do it all over the place at the same time. Here's a little look at the tower, and we've seen these kind of emblems before. They come up quite frequently, along with the lions and the griffins and numerous columns. And then you go all the way up to the tower. Got some pediments right there. More columns and little portal, and then little angelic figure on the top. Plaster of Paris. Oh, yeah. Well, and it could well be. That's right. And maybe that was its original purpose. No, I'm with you. Yeah, who knows what was originally in those emblems? If it was a face or if it was some other figure, we just don't know. And not think twice of it, right? Anybody know who this gentleman is right here? Or who we're told it is? Yeah, geopolymer or some advanced form of concrete. I believe that was a baseball diamond, at least that's what they tell us, but for all we know, it could have been cricket, or it could have been something else entirely. Yeah, they said it was baseball. Oh, yeah. So this is President McKinley. He was assassinated at the end of this particular World's Fair. Your second dad. Okay, Corey. Yeah, we get it. Oh, yeah. Yeah, don't worry, Jamie. I got Brisbane high on the list. That'll probably be coming sooner rather than later. I always like this image right here because here you can see all the detail in the towers all together. Jack Nicholson. Okay, that cracked me up a little bit more than it should have. Oh, yeah. Well, and then when you actually look in the McKinley assassination, the assassin was quickly brought to trial, was very quickly executed, and then, if memory serves, they put the body in acid. I mean, it was gone, done, and done just like that. It was really strange if you look into the McKinley assassination and the story behind it. So, but don't worry, they gave McKinley a really nice memorial, a tomb, just like they gave Garfield a tomb. You'll never guess what state it is. No, that's okay. I don't need to be anybody else's dad. You can all be your own dads and moms, so. Yeah, exactly. Down the memory hole. So again, Buffalo, Chicago, all these fairs all over the place. The president attending and getting assassinated. Strange contrast that you see in some of the statues and images and detailing that makes you realize that they're probably a little bit older, or they give that indication of being a little older. Hey, TSS, welcome from Brazil. Good to see you. Hey, it might be. Don't be too surprised what you see in Iowa these days. Uh, that's a good question there. Yeah. It might be a sound effect more than anything. Yeah, it does look Incan, doesn't it? Now, here's one of the contrasting images. So they'll tell us that this is how everything was cheaply made at the Buffalo World's Fair. And this is part of one of the main, one of the Arch of Triumph. And regardless of what it was made out of, how does this make any sense with how it's tipping over and still standing up like that? Does that make any sense to you? The Philosopher's Stone. What is going on? Yeah. And apparently, the other thing that plaster and stucco does is it defies gravity when you tear it down. I didn't know that. Yeah, your guess is as good as mine. Super dodgy. Yeah, it doesn't appear to be a real image. Something seems to be really off with that, so. And I think that's what they're supposed to see, Darius, is that it's supposed to be something that's just completely out of bounds. Now, this is a drawing of the assassination of McKinley, and yeah, you can see the Secret Service is asleep on the job. I don't know, maybe they were too busy chasing after Willem Dafoe, if anybody saw To Live and Die in LA. Oh yeah, isn't that the truth? Oh boy. Here's one of the coins from the Buffalo World's Fair, and you could also get playing cards. You can still find them today, and here's that supposed arch, or at least these main pillars, or these main entryways to the gate when they were still standing. So, yeah, they don't appear to be cheap stucco that just defy gravity right now. So, there you go. Oh, yeah. Well, because hats look cool. Everybody wore a bowler hat then, so. What's up, Jason? Good to see you. Oh, yeah. And then in Buffalo, you still have this, the city hall with the big giant obelisk out in front of it, and the memorial. And I've explored this. Old World Explorations explored this. We took a look at it when we did our exploration together last week in a good old Art Deco building that's still in Buffalo. Oh, I'd love to see that, Mini Fires. Thank you very much. Yeah, they turned the gravity off. They didn't pay the gravity bill at that point. Well, there you go. Oh, yeah. Yeah, exactly. That's probably true. I like that. He's asking about the buildings. Get him. Oh, wait, we forgot to guard the president. Yeah, exactly. That is a Ghostbusters building, so. Okay, let's go to the next ones here. And let's see. We'll go to San Diego. Let me get this up here. And this is from the Panama, California World's Fair, 1915. San Diego, this is still part of what is today Balboa Park. Thanks, my bailiwick zone. I appreciate that. Yeah, well, you can't have a birdhouse without a pediment, so. Oh, yeah. Hey, Shannon. Yeah, Kung, exactly. So you can still see a lot of this if you go down to San Diego. And you can see this ornate detail. And then look at this. I mean, this reminds me of the bark buildings that we have down in Mexico, the one that we looked at. And supposedly this was done for a World's Fair in San Diego, 1915 and 1917. So one of the longer ones. Yeah, exactly. Ooh, well, there's another reason to go to Buffalo, I guess, right? Come March. Oh, the blimp hangar that burned down in San Diego. Oh, yeah. Well, and I think that might have been something that remained from this particular site. So, oh, yeah. Nope, these are still standing. You can go to Balboa Park and see them today. Yeah, that's a good way to describe it. And then there's some of the older images, but I mean, that gives you an indication that there is still something there. Who knows? Maybe they just flick a button and then bam, you got an eclipse. It's that easy. And this just shows the attendance, over months. I mean, look at all these people. Remember, this is San Diego, California, 1915. Over 150,000, over 100,000. Keep in mind, World War I's going on at this time. Now, granted, it's not going on in the United States, but that's a good question there, Many Fires. I'm going to have to look into that. But basically, every major city, we believe, was on a geometrically precise foundation structure or a star fort, so. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. We'll go ahead and hit that like button. We'll go ahead and transition here to our next set of images. So we're going to stay in California. We're going to go to the Panama Pacific International Exposition of 1915, the exact same year. And let's get this one up. And let me know when you can see this beauty. The good old Tower of Jewels. Hey, Raven Fox, good to see you. Thanks. We're always finding new ones, Many Fires. I mean, I wasn't even aware of the one in Japan until I did the exploration there, so. Oh, yeah. So keep in mind, this is San Francisco now. So San Francisco and San Diego, same state. Now, yes, California's a big place. Did a World's Fair in 1915. Oh, yeah. Let's get a look at some better ones of this. So we're in San Francisco. Oh, yeah. Check out that dome there. Yeah, it's a nice temporary structure. Hey. All right. All right. Oh, this one right here, Rebecca? Good old San Francisco. Oh, yeah, I forgot about... Yeah, they do show that one there, don't they? Yeah, you're probably right, Jordan. Nope. Nothing to see here. Let's look at some more of these. So, yeah, this is one of the famous paintings where you can see the Tower of Jewels. I think this was the horticulture building, if memory serves. Here's another image of it. Now, what's the one structure that remains from this World's Fair? We saw video footage of it at the start of the exploration. Oh, there you go. Yeah, Sean P's on top of it. Palace of Fine Arts. Nope. Now, they give us that story. Hey, Dwayne, good to see you, that they rebuilt it. Yeah, exactly. They give us the story that they rebuilt it in the 60s. And I remember looking at it in an earlier exploration, the Palace of Fine Arts. Hey, it's okay. It's okay. Just saved a little time. It's all good. Oh, yeah, that's a good one. I think I'm going to have to get to Devil's Bunker at some point in time. Huh. I don't know. Don't know. Yeah, exactly. Temporary looking building does look like a machine, doesn't it? So here we have the lights out here with the tower. Hard to say how real this is. Yep, that's right, Raven, right after the 1906 earthquake and fire, 9 years later. And there's been a lot of looks being done at this, and I know Howdy Mikowski took a look at this, so. Hey, thanks, Sooner West. I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. Yeah, exactly. Well, I guess it just depends. Who knows? Don't worry about numbers. Just hit that like button and we'll keep talking. All right? It's all good. I think free energy is possible. Well, why would anybody want you to have free energy? So. Here's another view of this particular structure. And I've always wondered, what were these originally? Yeah. And I think that's a lot of them. Yeah, why didn't this just become Disneyland? Yeah, it does give the indication there were a lot of buildings there. But who knows what's really going on? Because remember, image might prove something, it might prove nothing. We just don't know. I hadn't really seen this structure before. California building. This is supposedly from the same exposition. Well, you really can't have anybody with free energy. People have to work and they have to be told what to do and when to do it. Oh, this one? Yeah, it's a great image. Yeah, good call out. Thanks, Old World Hamster Wheel Cranes. Good to see you, Taylor Michael Thompson. Yeah. They tell us that it was done by temporary contracted workers. You know, it's the same story in all these World's Fairs. Oh, yeah, Palace of Imagination. That's a good one. And here's an image of the Palace of Fine Arts. If you ever saw the movie The Rock, it's featured prominently there, and half a dozen other movies. I just remember it from The Rock. I think that's the first place I can remember seeing it in film. Hey, Debbie, good to see you. Yeah, exactly. Unfortunately. Most definitely. Another one of the Tower of Jewels. Interesting things going on with the sky up here. Now, I always thought this was an interesting image. You don't see this image too much. This shows you the Palace of Fine Arts and how it compares with modern San Francisco. Yeah, it just stands out a little bit, doesn't it? I suppose it depends which flood you're talking about, Jordan, but if you're talking about the last reset, I would say this is definitely pre-last reset, if these are all remaining structures, which the Palace of Fine Arts probably is. Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's probably a reason why you don't see this image of it too much, or this kind of perspective, just to see how much it stands out in comparison to the other buildings around it. Yeah, exactly. Oh, I see. Exactly. No, that's a lot of videos in that answer. Oh, yeah. Very much so. Now, here's where you get one of these strange comparisons where you see a high-quality building, but then what appears to be a very low-quality statue. So, again, I'm not sure, what's the reality of the image. Oh, Time After Time? Yeah, that film was set in San Francisco. Malcolm McDowell and David Warner, wasn't it? Yeah, it was a good movie. Directed by Nicholas Meyer, too, the guy who did Star Trek II and The Day After. Our nuclear scare flick. Yeah, maybe. But the thing we have to be careful for, because what's happened to it now? Now it's the, ridiculousness show. That's all you see on that channel these days. Kind of miss music videos, I'll be honest. Oh, yeah. And then we had this great image that shows you what the overall original city likely looked like. With the Palace of Fine Arts and then the Tower of Jewels and the other buildings. And when you see this kind of layout, and of course there's no images really of this fully available, there are some, we've seen them, but you get an idea of how different this was and what this really looked like and what this reflected. Well, and that's why we just have to keep exploring and asking those questions, because that's the only way we're going to find out. Yeah, I'm with you, Jamie. It is a citadel. Without a doubt. Yeah, another one of these fountains. And it's not like there's a water issue in California now or anything like that. Another fountain. And here you can see the quality, but I mean, what's the quality of the image? It's really hard to say. Yeah, that's a good one, Augusta. Yeah, and that's really the image and the impression that it gives us too, isn't it? So this is when they tore it down, and this is another one of these interesting gravity-defying images, or maybe they caught it in an action photo because here the photography was working properly so they could catch an action photo, or, it really advanced. Oh yeah, there's no doubt about it. Yeah, that's another one of those topics certain people can't talk about. Yeah, I'm with you, Many Fires. We remember how that one went, didn't we? And it seems that water played a really critical role in the energy at that time. So, Anyway, that's the last one of those, but I do have a couple bonuses, so let me pull it up real quick. And hopefully these made it. I think they did. All right, 1 second. These are the last series of images that we have. Okay, this is in Glasgow. Hopefully I'm pronouncing it correctly. Sometimes, I just get zapped on my pronunciations, but we're looking at the art gallery and museum. This is from one of the World's Fairs that occurred in Glasgow, and we did take a look at it. Really nice building. And we recall that the original World's Fair happened in the United Kingdom or Great Britain at the time with the Crystal Palace in 1851, and then they moved the Crystal Palace. Yeah, kind of nice for a temporary fairs building. I think this was constructed, they tell us, right around the turn of the century, right into the 1900s. But here's what the interior of it looks like. And you can see that on the interior, this is most certainly no temporary building. Well, for one, it's still standing. But then, two, we see many of the architectural detailings that we see in much larger buildings. Oh, yeah, it sure is. Batman lived there. Yeah, no doubt. That's true. Oh, yeah, Sean. There's all kinds of World's Fairs. Hey, Walter, good to see you. I'd love to see Northern Lights. It's been a while. But anyway, look at some other images. Here's the Crystal Palace, and this is from what was supposedly World's Fair number 1 in 1851. And then, as if it wasn't enough, they moved it, the whole thing, in 1854. And this is another one of those big question points. So, not sure what to tell you on it. All right, but while you're admiring the Crystal Palace, I'm just going to show you one last thing before we call it a exploration. And that's by looking at the list of World's Fairs. And give me 1 second here. I'm just prepping my screen on it. Because it's pretty crazy when you look at how many World's Fairs that there really were. And it gets even crazier when you see how many there were in the 19th century and the early 20th century. Oh, yeah. That's true. It's a good question. The last one I knew of, B. Hendricks, was, I think it was over in the UAE, but I might be wrong on that. So, because now they're just more about showcasing technology. We don't do buildings anymore. Yeah, alchemy, that's right. Okay, let's see if I can share this last screen with you here. 1 second. Oh, darn, it's not coming up. Okay, well, 1 second. We'll look at some other images here. And this is a lesser known World's Fair that we're going to take a look at to close it out for the night. And this is in Charleston in South Carolina. How many people knew? Yeah, I think you're right. I think Saudi. You're right. That's the next one on there. Yeah, they say so. But then it's a difference between what they recognized as full World's Fairs or not. It's just interesting to think about that. I have not. Oh, yeah. All kinds of wondrous architectural achievements were built in the World's Fairs, so. So anyway, Charleston, South Carolina. And yet we have some very intriguing pictures with some incredible images in Charleston, South Carolina. Now let's recall that South Carolina and Charleston felt the wrath of Sherman, much in the same way that Atlanta supposedly did. So, hey, thanks. Take care of yourself, Stephen. Have a good one. Oh, I didn't know that. I'll have to check that out. Oh, yeah, without a doubt. Well, and it's funny because when you look at the World's Fairs, the number of them decreased dramatically after World War II. Hey, Old World New York, good to see ya. Yeah, and I think you're onto that, Rod, because if you look at how they decreased after World War II, I mean, there were still quite a few World's Fairs in the 1930s, but then the breaking point was right in the 1940s, and then there just weren't any anymore after that. But I mean, some of these structures, I mean, here you go, your little palace slash state capitol building for a World's Fair in Charleston in the 19 teens. And so, again, they're just all over the place. You can never get enough of them. Good to see you, Ishko 108. Welcome. Oh, yeah. You talking about the Crystal Palace? Yeah, it was just insane. I remember doing the math. I can't remember what it was, how many panes of glass they had to produce in an hour. It was crazy. It was something that completely defied logistical explanation. But, don't let that stop anybody. Yeah, that's right, Jamie. And you can throw it in the salt water and it's the same thing. Well, I think we know the answer to that. It's because we can't, but nobody wants to hear that. They just want to say that we opt not to. We could, but we just don't do it. Or we have too many safety standards. We don't have, or we have too many safety standards. We have too many distractions. There's a variety of reasons. Hey, I'm one. Good to see you. Well, and here's the thing. That's a great point, and I think it's a good point to end the exploration on. Why don't they do them today? If these were just made temporary buildings out of plaster and stucco, well, obviously we could easily do that today because we have a much greater logistical capacity than we did back then. And if these would draw a lot of people and they were cheap and easy to construct, then why wouldn't somebody do this as a money-making endeavor? Well, and then the reason given is, well, they didn't make money back then, so, we're not going to do them now. Oh, yeah. Yeah, replica. I do wonder about those things they call replicas, so. Yeah, exactly. Well, repeat, divert. That's usually how it goes. Yeah, and it's funny, Jeff 6. I tried to do a video on that about how they're trying to counterfeit that, but had some technical difficulties with the video. You know how that goes. Oh, they did one in Nashville, Tennessee, and it's still standing, and it's a mighty beauty. But yeah, let's see somebody else do one, right? Now. I appreciate that, Fred. Yeah, go ahead and hit that like button if you haven't already done so. Yeah, I don't know. There might be something with that one too, cross-threading, but I am of the mindset that they seriously don't have the capacity to do so. So, yeah. All right. Well, I think we've gone through everything that we wanted to explore for this particular live stream. I hope you enjoyed taking a look at these various expositions, but I think what it really boils down to, we have a lot of questionable things. Did they really do the buildings? Are the images real? Are these simply things that we're supposed to focus on to divert us from real buildings that we can explore, or to try to explain real buildings that we can explore? You can still go to the Parthenon in Nashville. You can still go to the Palace of Fine Arts in San Francisco. You can verify those buildings are there and that they're made of something pretty incredible. Yeah, exactly. I think all of us would, Rod Tech. Oh, you're wealthy. You're welcome, Kathy. Threw me off there when you said Lucian. Yeah, they're trying to, because I think they realize there's a big gap in what's available. No, they don't. And, the World's Fairs really weren't covered either, and they're not covered in universities, so. Oh, yeah. Well, I hope everyone enjoyed this exploration. And what you got there, Old World Amsterdam? Yeah, that's right. Well, thanks. I appreciate that. All right. Well, I hope you all are having a good holiday seasons wherever you are or wherever you are in the land. And you have a great weekend. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. And I'm going to go over these comments again and refine these explorations just a little bit, but had a great time and appreciate you being here and your input. And it's always very useful. So with that, I bid you all a good evening, good morning, or good day.